Good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Stalls. I hope you're in the right session. I am actually shocked that anybody showed up this late in the day, but thank you. And I am speaking about VR, AR, that's virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and sort of presenting it in the learning management system. So before I begin, and I've forgotten what my next slide is, so we'll put this up here. So we'll look at introduction to cross reality, so what that term means, and just to give a bit of context there. Oops, go back one. I'm really interested in talking about the pedagogical foundations for this thing, not just throwing something in, it's called VR or AR, something spectacular, and everybody going, ooh, and getting no outcomes of it because it's just a shiny thing that we've thrown in. Look, if we're going for a press release, great, because it's got a purpose. But if it's just a shiny thing without a good pedagogical foundation, it's not sustainable. I'm not interested in it. And I'll have a quick, brief demonstration of something that's in Blackboard Learn Ultra, if there is time. But before we really begin, who have I got in the room? Are we mostly support type staff, academic staff who are actually wanting to put it in? So who's actually academic, who's teaching? If I can see anybody. Are we mostly support staff? Yeah? I think that's mostly where we're at. So we're the guys who, the lecturer has a brilliant idea and we've got to somehow make it work. Is that right? Okay, yeah. That was me. So a little bit about me. I spent more than 17 years in higher ed. Started out as a uber geek, locked in the basement with the servers, and sort of fell in love with higher education, and spent the last 10 years managing the learning technologies in Edith Cowan University. I am 2 days away, fingers crossed, to getting my confirmation of candidature for a PhD in education, which it's got absolutely nothing to do with technology, which is wonderfully refreshing. It's around teacher education and Aboriginal students, so it's just a subject that just energizes me. So I'm really loving it. So this talk came about 6 years ago. Paramedic lecturer came to me and said, "Hey Richard, I know you're into tech stuff." He said, "Have you ever played that game Doom? It's first-person shooter, you're shooting monsters." He says, "Let's do a Doom, but instead of running around with a gun, you're a paramedic and you're running around triaging people." And ever since then, me and him and VR simulations in the learning management system, I've been hooked. But what is it? XR, it's a term. Most of you must have heard about it. Now, cross reality, it's the whole sort of spectrum from virtual, augmented, mixed. It's about augmenting the senses. This is a handy picture. If you just think of a mixer that's going from one extreme, which is like, and we're not going to get too in-depth with philosophy, but the real environment. Let's talk about the physical environment outside the digital, and the virtual reality, and it's somewhere in between. You can mix in somewhere in there, and look, we can talk and argue and wrangle on nuances in between there, but I like just going cross reality. It's there somewhere, and it's got differences, but hey, that's the place the space we're playing in. Brief overview. Augmented and mixed reality, that's a lot of us are used to on our devices, where we get a camera picture of something, and something digital is in the real world there. We can interact with it, move around, maybe poke it and pull it apart, that kind of thing. But then we've also got things like the Microsoft HoloLens, where it's a device that lets you see the real world but puts digital assets in there to manipulate. And I'm really hot on that kind of technology, because you don't have to develop an entire world. We've got the world, and we can just put something in it, and the cost of development and all that, we're just developing an object, and we get to sort of leverage the real world. So I really like that side of things. But virtual reality is I don't know, it's the big, fun, shiny one. and I personally love it. I was mucking around with an Oculus Rift. It's like, how much did the Oculus Rift cost us? $250. Yes, $250, $300. It's incredibly cheap. The price point is all of a sudden has become something that you could feasibly think of fitting out a teaching space with. It's cheaper than a bunch of laptops. It's like, oh, you could actually do something here. So that is, you create an entire world, an immersive experience that actually shuts you off from the world. So there's different things we might be looking at, and we'll explore how we might gravitate towards one or the other, or somewhere in the mix, depending on what you're trying to do in the pedagogical foundation. So this is what we want to look at. And we've got a smiling teacher because she hasn't yet started using the technology. No, she's practiced, it's working well, and she's really excited. So I want to just look at a couple of pedagogical theory areas that I found very intriguing to explore and maybe use the whole thing or parts of it to inform how we might want to make the best use of some of these new technologies. So I do have a bit of a tip sheet. So if you go into the app and you go into today's session, there's a link to a PDF, which is what I call a cross-reality pedagogical toolkit. It's just, it goes into this content in a bit more depth, and there's some further readings and bibliography in the back, so you can sort of explore that and unpack it for yourselves. But situated experiential learning is one of these pedagogies, these theoretical frameworks that can really hold promise to how we might implement some of these technologies. So a bit of background, experiential learning, this is when the idea that the learner interacts directly with the world. So it's not it's not removed from them, but they get to touch, manipulate, muck around with, and just do something in the world. Situated cognition is another part of this framework, where we're looking at the learning occurs in the real world. And we know that when I'm talking about the real world, it's in inverted commas, because it's what I'm using that term there is it's the world that is incredibly complex and full of contradictions and missing information and other things besides what we're teaching. Anybody who's got their first job all of a sudden figures out that, especially if you studied a degree. I did computer science, so it's, I had this nice ordered idea of what working in the real world would be, and then you get in and you go, I didn't learn anything about office politics, and I didn't learn anything about dressing. It's just not good enough to rock up in my shorts and t-shirt. What's going on? The real world is this complex interaction. So the idea is, how about the learning gets situated in this place so there's a bit more richness and a bit more contextual experience that the students can get a hold of. And so situated experiential learning, there's a few factors that if you want to keep in your mind when you're looking at cross-reality technologies. Is immersion is a key feature. It's a sense of presence, and that obviously connects me to virtual reality. Interaction, this is probably where the most value for the next step is realizing that, if you're in the headset, you're doing something, but it's really, really important that there's there's opportunities for interacting with students to the teacher. Something we don't really, because the technology sort of works against it. You put your headset on and you're closed off in this own little world, so we need to explore that a bit more. Complexity. So it reflects the pedagogical complexity, not just making it hard. It's not like a game where you just chuck in, a level 10 boss that takes 4 million hits before. And we're not talking about making it just hard for hard's sake, but including the complexity or elements of the complex real world into the learning experience as is appropriate. So that's the idea there. So how can we put that into practice? We've got a bit of tech. We're like, this is a real neat way of thinking about teaching and learning, and how can we actually put this into practice? So immersion immediately comes to mind is 360 videos and images. And let's pick an example. So I'm teaching Italian. And so I can say, okay, students, sit up straight. Here's the first word, and we repeat the word, and we're doing some learning, but it's very disconnected from everything. So I thought, well, what about, and this is what I like to stress with people when they're thinking about implementing technologies. It's not going to do everything all in one shot, but hey, we're over here. If we just move it 10%, we're 10% better than we were last semester. That's enough to put the effort in, because next semester we can build on that and we get that compounding interest of improvement. So maybe we can take one step and go, well, let's situate the students in Italy. Let's give them a immersive video tour of Italy, and there's people speaking Italian, there's Italian sights, there's Italian sounds, there's Italian street signs that they're encountering. And so, okay, we're in Italy now, and then we go into a language lesson. Well, it's done something small, and I think it's enough to think about there, but we'll talk a bit more about how some people have been doing that in a bit more detail about that. I should have said in the beginning, I'm obsessed with technologies that can be used by every single lecturer I get a hold of. They don't have to be some technical superstar. I'm not interested in that, because if it requires a $3 million grant and a superstar lecturer and a superstar support staff, I mean, give me $3 million, I'll pretty much do anything with this space. I'm interested in, there's Joe sitting at his desk and Professor Sue gives him a call and says, I want to do something. I'm interested in getting that stuff happening, and yeah, we can do some stuff there. Interaction, so the virtual reality, cross-reality stuff is starting to catch up with that idea where you might be able to interact in the virtual world, but that's quite complex. We're not quite there yet, so maybe we just take that and put that into the learning management system, do some discussions, some collaborate stuff, and take care of the interactions there and layer it in. Complexity. So who has seen a site called Within? Clouds over Sidra, Waves of Grace. Anybody seen these virtual reality documentaries? Now these, I've steered away from the STEM side of things, because if you Google, the first 3 million hits are all STEM. There's incredible stuff there you can get right at your fingertips, but the arts and humanities, it's a bit less obvious how this stuff fits together. Maybe one of my learning outcomes, I want to, and we know emotional connection is a very good driver for learning outcomes. If the student is emotionally connected, invested in the subject matter, they're going to learn. That's one of the things that literature does show. There's quite a strong connection there. So there's a bunch. If you go to that website there, there's a group of virtual reality, immersive documentaries that take you on a journey on, like Clouds Over Sidra. Sidra is a Syrian refugee, and she just tells the story of her as a young girl, what it meant to be ripped out of her home country, and what it feels like to be in that sort of halfway place of a refugee camp, and how she's sort of still, how resilient kids are, but it's her story from her point of view, and it's such a great way of immersing the student in an environment that you could never hope. I mean, you could never hope to get clearance to take your students to a war-torn country to experience it, but boy, you can use the technology to get some parts of that and that emotional connection and that complex environment that this girl is living in, and using that as a launch pad for some interaction discussions, or maybe a video essay. And we'll talk a bit more like that. Here's one case study. I've linked it in the document that you can get in the app. So these guys, Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, who's used Unity 3D as a development environment? Yeah, there's a few of us there. So this is basically, it's an everything engine, but it started as a game engine, okay? And that's how I got hooked, because remember that paramedic guy said, Doom, but paramedics running around? So I thought, that's what I know. So we started mucking around there. But these guys basically built a 2-scale accurate virtual environment in a game engine that reflected an actual real-life Fijian village with all its complexity and scale. And the students would put on their headset and wander around this virtual village, encountering Fijian villages. And as they encountered it, one thing that's really hard in the virtual environment is a real high-fidelity human interaction, because unless you've got a AAA game budget where you're spending probably a couple of $1 million on modelling and voice actors, it's pretty hard. So instead of trying to do that there, as they encountered a Fijian villager which switched to a video, and they could experience the video interaction which switched back into the world. So they sort of used that as a way of weaving in and out and, you know, getting the best of both worlds. And they wanted students to really understand some of the key things about that complex world of sustainable development and the impact on these societies like a Fijian village. So they used Unity 3D, they built this 2-scale village, and the result was a real strong sense of immersion. Students were like, man, I felt like I was there. And the scale meant that, you know, it's one thing to go, oh yeah, I understand conceptually you can get a Google map, but when they're having to walk from the beach through the village, and they could get a sense of how different decisions would impact the villages and what it meant to their day-to-day life. So that was a way that they'd use that situated pedagogy, the name just went right out of my head, but they used the one we've just been talking about and implemented it in a virtual reality thing, did some study and went, actually, this really worked. And I'm saying that's like probably something you need a bit of funding, a bit of project to get to, but my goodness, we can see, yes, it's working. They've studied it, and these sort of experiences really work for students, but we could leverage some resources like those clouds over Sidra, some virtual tours of places to do at least part of that for our students quite easily. Another one I'll quickly touch on is guided exploratory learning. So discovery learning, pure discovery learning. There's a saying. It says, "Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he will eat for a lifetime. Take a man to the lake and use discovery learning and he will starve to death." Have you? No? Discovery learning and the idea that, we'll just give the students complete freedom and all sorts of, we know that it sounds like really good, but we know evidence shows that doesn't work too well mostly because of the misconceptions of how the student views the subject. They can't quite escape their little bubble of misconception. They need a bit of guidance to do their discovery learning. So discovery learning is inquiry-based constructivist approach, and the student draws on their own experiences and constructs and organizes knowledge in that sort of hands-on experimental approach. Guided discovery learning, this is the important thing, is you give the learners enough freedom so that their own cognitive, their own learning juices flow. So they're engaged, so they're not just sitting there passively receiving, but they're engaged in the process. But you also give them enough guidance so that they're not getting stuck in less than useful areas of work. Put it into practice. Hey, augmented reality seems to match quite well here. So I will talk about a case study later, but somehow you might put this in practice in your teaching and learning. Framing the knowledge space. So drawing a bit of a sketch of where you want the students to play so that they're starting at a useful starting point. Introduce the background. So you might embed some short videos, presentations, collaborate session. You might use a 360 YouTube video that, again, gives them a bit of information, but it's a bit more interactive, immersive. I keep coming back to these sort of immersive, situated videos as a good tool, because I'm doing my PhD in Aboriginal ways of knowing, and one of the things that I think is just the Aboriginal worldview really can enrich us is this idea of place-based learning, of being connected to the place where things occur. And we can't always take the students all around, but we sure can begin to use some of the technology to bring some of that into the classroom. Ask specific questions with hint feedback. So you ask a sort of a guiding question that gets them thinking in the space, and you give them a bit of feedback that says, yeah, that's a common misconception, and guiding them away from those places where they can get stuck with discovery-based learning. Hint field, you can read that there. Discovery. So this is where it really gets exciting. So the guidance bit, we know we're pretty comfortable. The discovery bit's really cool. So introduce them to the problem. Now we're thinking puzzles, mysteries, really hooking them into the thrill of discovering what this thing is about and being creative about it. And it doesn't mean that you have to create a whole sort of how to host a murder type situation in your classroom, but you can begin. I think the power of narrative is quite powerful, even if it's just a bit of a story that leads them into personal experience or the experience of an early researcher and the way they encountered the problem. It's important that you confront common misconceptions, because that's the danger in this one here. And keep the activity procedures simple, because you want them to spend their effort on not doing all the steps right, but really putting their mind to uncovering and exploring and coming up with a bit of a map of what the knowledge is meaning for them. And allow learners to construct their own explanations. So what about you create an assignment where the first step is they say, I think this is going to happen. This is my hypothesis. So you might not use those terms depending on what your students are, but they say, this is what I reckon is going to happen. And then the second phase of the assignment is they do the thing, and did it happen? And they can go, oh, okay. And they start to construct that meaning and knowledge based around their own experiences, and it allows you to, as a facilitator of that learning experience, let's say, because teacher's not quite the right word there, is it? To see their journey, and you can stand on the side and guide them a bit, and you've got to capture that data, and the LMS has, any LMS is going to be able to use that, where you can have instead of just an essay where they do a draft, and we're talking about something that uses that same mechanic, but for a very different purpose of, instead of it's a draft, it's their prediction, and instead of the final copy, it's they're wrestling with the results and what it doesn't mean. What did they think before, and why is the result different, and what does that mean, and what does their map of the knowledge look like now? And that's really intriguing, and the feedback process can be so rich in that. So, case study, there's in a school in Malaysia. This is actually a high school in Malaysia. They had they were looking at atoms. So one of the common misconceptions with people who are first encountering this sort of atomic theory is that an atom is just a round thing. They don't realize it's actually particles that are all interacting. So they wanted the students to investigate, and they used an augmented reality where they had these cards. You can see them on the table there of the atoms, and they would use an augmented reality which would turn the card into an image according to atomic theory, and they could explore and they could combine them and see what was happening. And they could experiment, and it was within these bounds that they were guided in. The students would just come up with ideas of what would happen and what does it mean, and they were guiding through, and they studied it, and the results were all learners improved on their knowledge. They found that they started here, every single student moved up the scale, which is cool. That's enough for me. But every learner responded that they found the learning activity rewarding and meaningful. Now that is another level. When you're engaged and in the process where you actually found it rewarding, and not just because I got a better grade, but because I found the process meaningful, that's quite cool. And that's an interesting case study if you're looking at it. Briefly here, this is definitely download. You'll get the slides, but download the PDF toolkit. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I've sort of mapped out. Take that word, put it into Google, and the first hit will be that thing. So Discovery VR is really cool. Within I'm Addicted To, we know a few other things there. Wonder VR is another app that you can build immersive lessons, basically. So one of the ones I did was I wanted to talk about cell structure of a plant, and then I borrowed a bit of Aboriginal pedagogy where as much as you can situate it in the place. So learning about a plant in a classroom is not good, but if you wandered into a field and saw a field of wheat, and then you're going to think about the structure of that wheat. So I had a virtuality lesson where you're standing in a field of wheat, and it's a 360 video, and up pop some elements, and you could dive into a virtual cell tour. You can come back out and take a bit of a quiz and maybe read a bit. And so the idea was, it's not the be-all and end-all, but boy, it's better than just a chapter in a textbook, and it does borrow from a lot of these areas. And so instead of just saying, hey, we're going to do some virtual reality, it's actually, we're doing some virtual reality for a very specific purpose, and we're sitting it on some well-tried pedagogical, theoretical foundations that we know work. People have tested and tried it, we know these things work, so you're not wasting your effort, you're actually compounding your effort on effort that's gone before, and you know you're going to have outcomes that are going to be good for your students. So I'm going to quickly show this video. So the idea is, my idea was, well, we have VR over here. This is typically what it looks like, even if you're using LMS. This is where we're doing the lesson stuff. Okay, stop doing the lesson stuff there, because we're going to go over here, we're going to do the VR stuff now, and we do the VR stuff, and we pack it away, and then the next lesson we come back over here and we go, now we're doing the learning stuff again. It's like, that doesn't make sense. What if we just brought it together? So for instance, 360 immersive video. I can use Kaltura is one of the methods, or 360 video from YouTube. You can embed it in the learning management system. So I've done that in Ultra, and it's real easy. We're all doing that. We take the thing, put it in, and it's there. Okay, so we do it once, we wrap a bit of stuff around. It's situated in the learning experience. The cool thing about the technology is, if I go in on my desktop and I click the link, I get that sort of view of a window where I can scroll around and look around, and that's cool, okay. But if I go on my phone, it gives me the opportunity to chuck it into a Google Cardboard, and I think we've got some for you to take home with you. Please use it. So you can put your phone in there. So the lecturer has done nothing different. They've just put it in, taking care of the desktop stuff. You've got your phone, you can use a Google Cardboard experience, and you're sort of looking around, that's cool. But what if you had one of these sort of $300 headsets? You put that on, and you get the full experience of wandering around this thing. And the lecturer's done one setup. They've used the technology and the learning management system and the browser and the device take care of all the rest of the stuff for you. And it's situated right in the flow of the lesson. You don't have to take them over there. So I've got a quick 2-minute video. Let's see if it plays a video. It was music. So the idea is, this one I used Wonder VR, that cell lesson. But the idea was, it's in line with all where the learning's already occurring. That point it goes, oh, you're on your mobile phone. I know I can present a much more immersive experience than if you're on a desktop. So it goes, okay, if you're on a desktop, you're cool, but this is, now I'm going to chuck you into a Google Cardboard experience. And so there we are. I'm standing in the field of wheat. The sounds.
They create energy with sunlight, and they use this energy to make what we use for our food.
I have to sit down on a chair if I'm doing this, because I go
and this
fall
takes
over.
us on a journey deep into the inner world of a plant cell.
Now this is a resource that they give to us for free. The Centre at the University of Western Australia. There's a quiz right there. They don't have to leave the field now. They can do a bit of testing of their knowledge right there and there, standing in that field of wheat. Now, like I was saying before, an important feature is interacting with staff and students. That's pretty hard, as that particular package doesn't do that very well. So let's not try and make that package to do it very well. If it's in line in the learning management system, it's very easy for the next item to be a discussion, and that's how it should be. And that kind of thing we can do in a classroom. We could do it with our online students, and we could do it with both, because the learning management system sort of what would you call it? It sort of manages the communication for everybody in the same place, and the lecturer has to set up once, and it gets used for many of those things. So there's a bunch of references. Download the document. Bunch of image attributions. Thank goodness for open source. This is awesome. Any questions? And what time do we finish? Right now. Okay. So any questions, come and grab me. But I'm really obsessed with how can we use this technology in the hands of every single lecturer in the LMS they're already familiar using it. I think we've got some good ideas, and I reckon we can grow this. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'd love to talk to you after.